This was a few years ago. It was pretty late, past 1:30 or 2 o'clock in the morning. I was living with this boy who was pretty abusive, and he had gotten really jealous at this party we were at earlier that night. Not even an hour after we had gotten home, he tossed me out on our front porch and locked the door behind me. I was knocking and pleading for him to please let me back inside. I was still wearing what I had worn to the party, and it was freezing outside. I wasn't sure what to do. He had my phone, purse, and wallet in the house with him, so I just sat on the porch crying. When he turned off the lights, both inside and outside of the house, well, I knew he wasn't going to let me back in. I felt so helpless and cold. I thought about knocking on a neighbor's door, though he didn't have many, but I had anxiety about waking any of them up and causing trouble for my boyfriend. So instead, I decided I would try to walk to this gas station and motel, which was like a little less than a mile away, so I could at least use their phone to try to call my girlfriend of mine to see if I could sleep over with her. A little bit into the walk, this tall white pickup truck was approaching on the opposite side of the road that I was on. I tried not to make eye contact for obvious reasons, but then I heard the truck stopping and beginning to make a U-turn, and my heart just started pounding. I just about froze up and forced myself to speed walk at the very least. The truck pulled up to me, and this guy rolled down his window and asked what I was doing out this late. I told him how I was going to meet my friend at the gas station and that she was expecting me. He sort of smiled and offered me a ride. I said, "No, thank you," citing that I shouldn't hitchhike. He told me, "Well, good. I don't pick up hitchhikers or anyone. You don't look like a hitchhiker, though. You just look like you need some help." He just kept driving next to me and told me I shouldn't think he was a creep, and he pulled out what looked like a police badge and told me he had just gotten off duty, which is why he was in civilian clothes and out so late. He said he wouldn't mind driving next to me just to make sure I get to where I was heading safely. I was naive and a bit too trusting of his kindness and credentials, and when he offered me a ride again, I said that it would be nice because the gas station wasn't that far away anyway. He popped the door open for me, and I hopped in. The radio was low. It was a little messy. The ashtray was full of cigarettes. There were a lot of newspapers on the passenger floor. As I was moving my feet, some of the papers shifted, showing a pair of handcuffs, some coffee cups, empty water bottles, rags, a bandana, and some other things. He apologized, saying that it was the truck he took hunting, but it was super warm, so I was happy and didn't mind at all. He told me his name was John. He asked why I was scantily dressed without a jacket, and I started to tell him about the party and the fight I had been in with my boyfriend. He was super charming and attentive. He even laughed that he could go back and arrest him. I asked about him, and he told me about his family. He was a young dad. He had a wife, a daughter, a son, and a dog. And I told him it was like he had the perfect little family, and he laughed and said he certainly did. Then it had sort of clicked for me to ask him if I could use his phone, but he said no because he had to save his battery. We were approaching the gas station, and he drove right past it. I politely said, "Oh, I think that's the one," but he didn't answer me. I immediately felt sick to my stomach. My heart started pounding. I started getting choked up. My eyes started tearing up as I was looking out the windows and watching the lights behind us getting further and further away. It was hard for me to even speak, but somehow I murmured, asking if he could please turn around, and he ignored me. Whenever I would look at him, he just looked empty-eyed and emotionless, totally dead and glazed. I looked back out the window and down at the road to see if maybe we were going slow enough that I could make a leap out of the car without seriously injuring myself. I remember always hearing, "Never go to the second location," but I thought about the possibility of jumping out and breaking an ankle and how it would be a lot harder to get away with one foot as opposed to two, debating with myself that there was snow on the ground. But then again, snow is hard to get along in, especially when you're not fully clothed. I feel so dumb now too, because I wasn't even tied up or anything. I was just so scared though. Like there was nothing but trees, an empty road, and us. I was crying pretty badly at this point and asked if I could please borrow his phone again. I don't know why I even asked, and he told me to stop talking. Then he started talking underneath his breath, saying, "Girls shouldn't be out so late. You shouldn't have been alone this late. Look what you're doing to me, dressed like a slut." And then there were other derogatory things he said. As he kept saying these terrible things, too many to mention, I wasn't even responding. I was just crying and trying to think past the fear I was feeling. I remembered the pair of handcuffs I had seen under the papers beneath my feet. I don't know how to describe it. It was like a scoop motion. I managed to use my feet to scoop the handcuffs up and use my heels and toes to push them under the bottom of my seat as far as I could. I was thinking of different things I could do to try to help myself, like if we were close enough to some upcoming lights or structures, if I ever made it to them, I could just grab the wheel and cause us to crash into them. Or maybe how if I got lucky enough for a cop to pass us, I could grab the wheel and swerve so he would appear to be a drunk driver and we'd get pulled over. I guiltily thought about the possibility if this man is just having a weird night and how if I did anything, it would hurt him. But I told myself that sort of thinking sort of got me into this mess. He pulled off road where there were still woods on both sides of us. On his side, the wooded trees were closer to the road. On mine, there was a small gap fully covered in thick, I don't know how many feet of snow, before the trees picked up maybe 10 to 16 yards away. He turned off the car and coldly said there was something wrong with the car and to get out with him. As he grabbed the keys and was stepping out of the car, I grabbed onto the center console and cried and pleaded not to make me get out with him because it was too cold. He turned around to face me, his door still open, and shouted at me to get out of the car because we had to go check out the trunk bed hatch. I dug my fingernails deeper into the console, thinking my cries of no and head shaking would cause him to come around to my side of the car and drag me out himself. I was crying and said, "Please, John, I'm so cold and scared." I was thinking of everything I ever heard. Humanize yourself. Use first names. He stared at me in this way. I can't even describe it to this day. He got back in the car and I slinked towards my window, scared he would drag me over the console. He turned off the headlights and everything just looked dark blue. He stared at the steering wheel for what felt like years before lighting a cigarette and looking out his window and back at me and then back out his window. He heard me shuffle my feet on the newspapers. I was just adjusting my legs, but while still staring out his window, told me if I thought about running, he had a quick way to get me where he wanted me. And oddly enough, I was sort of thinking of running minutes before that, but reasoned that if he wanted me out of the car, then I should definitely stay in. Otherwise, he could chase me or shoot me in case he had hunting rifles in the back. I didn't dare look. I'm glad I was right. I think at that point, I sort of hit some sort of bottom of my reserve, and instead of panic, there was numbness and exhaustion. There were still an occasional hot tear or two, but I just remembered being numb. I talked to a psychiatrist about this sort of thing, and he thinks it just came from my ex-boyfriend giving me PTSD. It was dead quiet, but I finally just barely audibly told him that my friend was still waiting for me, and I asked about his wife and children, and he flatly said he didn't have a wife or children, and that his house was empty. I asked him what he was thinking about, and he said, "I'm thinking of what to do with you." He didn't say it angrily, he just said it flatly and coldly, which sort of scared me more. I did start getting worked back up to a cry at that point, and he told me not to cry and turned the car on, offering me some heat. I just cried and said I wanted to go home. Eventually he started driving and kept driving until we were approaching a gas station. I was gauging the right time to reach for the wheel, but before I could, he started slowing down. While pulling up, he told me not to tell anyone or he would find me. Then he told me all he was doing was teaching me a lesson not to hitchhike with strangers. He was almost coming to a complete stop when he told me to get out before he changes his mind. Before he could even get another look at me to assess my understanding, I was already down out of the truck and sprinting towards the gas station. The panic was overwhelming me, but then I stopped and remembered to try to see his license plate. I turned around but only caught the blur of the last 3 numbers as he was driving off. I ran inside and asked the clerk behind the counter to please call the police. I waited until the officer got there, and I'll be honest, I was a little scared it would be John. My fears melted away when the new-faced policeman got there. I gave him the description of John, his appearance, the vehicle color and type, the parts of the license plate number I had caught, the fact he said he was an off-duty cop, just basically anything I could. I asked him if he could look at the camera, and the officer disappeared in the back for a little bit, then came back out saying there was nothing on them. I asked if I would be able to look, and the officer said no and asked me if I didn't trust him, and I told him of course I did. The officer gave me a ride to my friend's, lecturing me for hitchhiking, consisting of him repeatedly asking if I knew who Ted Bundy was. Of course I knew. I was just naive to think it could never happen to me, and I was desperate for some warmth. I never heard anything back about the report that was made, so I would try to follow up, and each time I did, they never got back to me aside from this one time I was told my case number didn't exist, but that didn't stop me from trying to follow up. Throughout the months and years, I asked my friend, whose home I had slept over that night, if she had ever heard of any weirdness or anything since that incident had happened to her or anyone up there, and she always says no. So I sort of let it go and try to tell myself that maybe he actually was just trying to teach me a lesson or something. I mean, I definitely never hitchhiked again, so if it was a lesson, it certainly worked. I never heard anything back having to do with the case. I never heard of any other odd experiences up there. Maybe it was just one man trying to teach me something. But honestly, sometimes I think I tell myself all of that to help me sleep better at night. I'm really glad I didn't get out of the car in the woods that night.